See everybody. We'll just get right back started here. Hope you guys had enough sugar and re-energized from that snack, right? So our next speaker is Melissa Miller with her topic, Balancing Compassion and Compliance in the Field. Melissa is the director of St. Clair County Animal Control in Michigan from 2009 to 2020. She works with the Humane Society Animal Rescue Team, assisting with large-scale cruelty and disaster responses. In 2012, she co-founded Dog Aid, a nonprofit helping keep pets out of shelters in Detroit. As the director of Detroit's Animal Care and Control from 2015 to 2017, she restructured the city's animal control and sheltering divisions. Melissa has also consulted for companion animal businesses, co-authored animal control ordinances, and is a certified canine behavior consultant, fear-free professional, and member of the National Animal Control Association. So welcome, Melissa.
Hi there. I've been told and have experienced earlier in the morning that the folks in the way back were having a problem hearing. Can you hear me back there? You good? Okay. I hit the wrong button. Let's try that again. There we go. That's me. A little bit about my bio. You guys heard I'm currently the director of St. Clair County Animal Control in Michigan. That's about an hour north of Detroit. Our county is pretty rural. We've got about 700 square miles, and we have one city that is pretty populated, and then down towards the south of the county, we're getting some suburban sort of creep from the next county over. So we have areas that the population is pretty dense, a lot of people that want to live on the waterfront, and then we have a lot of farmland and all sorts of critters that we deal with. So how many people are here from an animal control agency? How many are animal control officers? All right, great. How many are from a brick and mortar rescue? Okay, what about a foster-based rescue? Okay, how many people are here from a primarily urban in area where you work and live? Okay, how about rural? Who's hanging out in the suburbs? Okay, a handful of you. All right. So when we talk about the letter of law versus the spirit of law, there's a lot of folks, especially that old-timey Lady in the Tramp dog catcher name that you remember. That really, that top-down, this is absolutely black and white, the law we must enforce. And as we have changed a little bit in how we view animals, that they're not, they can be a public safety risk at times, they can be a disease vector at times, but for the most part, animals in our lives are companions, have a utilitarian purpose if they're livestock, if they're livestock guardian dogs, dogs that people keep for protection. So regardless of how we interact with animals, they play an incredible important part in our lives. And a lot of people have a lot of big feelings about dogs and cats and other animals. They have a lot of really big feelings about dogs. How many people have heard within Facebook comments or on the socials or just in real life, we need better laws? Okay. How many people feel right now we have kind of okay laws? I see a couple of them.
Not the state, but some cities.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about that a little bit. So when it comes to enforcement, a lot of times people see a badge and they see, that is the person that is enforcing an ordinance, enforcing a law, a state law, a city code. The term "the pound" came from the idea of impounding animals. Coming from Southeast Michigan, our dog law is the dog law of 1919, where they were still having horse races down Woodward Avenue, like straight down the middle of Detroit, right? So the whole concept of the dog law was there wasn't a vaccine yet for rabies, and so we needed to do something about these dogs that were not owned, running around and biting people. So there comes state law, there's rabies control, there's disease control and prevention. In 2013, there was a leptospirosis outbreak in southwest Detroit, where the Department of Agriculture and there's an epidemiology team that came up because while they were doing major construction on a highway, all the rats from there went up into the neighborhoods. And so there's a lot of things that can spread within the animal population, but also spread to humans. We also have to look at dangerous animals, leash law violations, things that are that might constitute neglect or cruelty. And in that, people who are animal control officers, whether you're deputized or you're sworn, whether you're part of an organization that works with humane law enforcement and investigations, you have a whole bunch of stuff that you have to balance. Some of that is our federal laws, like the Animal Welfare Act, pertaining to zoos, laboratories, commercial breeding, or large volume breeding facilities, as they're known in some laws. We would call them puppy mills, but you have your state laws, and then sometimes you have municipal ordinances or local city codes that go farther than all of those laws combined. Sometimes we get a little too into the weeds with being more prescriptive in a law rather than allowing our animal control to have a broader policy base within the law where they can write a policy about how to manage cats or how to manage their own intake. So some places have laws where if you find a stray dog, you have to bring it to animal control. In my county, if you find a stray dog, you have to report it to animal control within 24 hours. So they don't necessarily have to bring it to us. And there's some different ways that we have worked with that for shelter intervention purposes and making sure animals get home quickly. How many people went 5 miles an hour or more on their way here? Yeah. So we know the difference between the spirit of the law. I like to say it's guidelines, not force fields, right? It's there. My mom will tell you the speed limit is the limit, Melissa Ann. You should stay under the limit. She would be the one driving at 63 miles an hour because she does not want to go over the limit. Basically, when you look at balancing empathy, balancing what the law says, we are always, as law enforcement folks, looking at, are you slipping into the gray area of what's called selective enforcement? Selective enforcement is where we're cutting some people some deals, but throwing a hammer down at others. And so part of balancing those two things is having realistic conversations about how every interaction we have with the people in our community is pretty gray. Some are more, yep, absolutely, I know exactly what to do here. But the reality is there's so many different people with so many different backgrounds, different cultures, different things that affect the way they see animals, the way they are able to provide for themselves, whether or not they have access to additional resources, family support, intergenerational families living in homes, that all make a huge impact on how we can better serve our communities. Most frequently, when you have someone who is following the spirit of the law, they're really looking at what is the true intent. The majority of the laws that we have around animals are truly animal protection laws. It's not going to change any quick way that animals are not considered property under the law in most cases. But we are seeing that there's quite a few laws that are coming forward or have been established where they do recognize the suffering of animals and adequate conditions. And then it falls on us, on the animal control officers, to help define what adequate care and adequate conditions are. One thing that I frequently say is there's a difference between how I might care for a dog and how someone else might care for a dog. My boss has a little dachshund named Noodle who wears coats and jackets and goes to all the fun things. I know people who have 24/7 dogs outside, and folks that have farm dogs that they live in the barn. Does that mean they don't love their animals in some important way or find them valuable? Not necessarily. I was just recently talking with a commissioner who said, well, you know, there's people who are responsible pet owners who get their dogs licensed. And I said, well, you know, really only about 30% of our county is licensed. There's a lot of really responsible dog owners. In fact, one that I just found that just dropped about $5,000 on his dog to do exploratory surgery they didn't even know was going to work, but the dog wasn't licensed. So we have to think about what makes somebody responsible and also what we can do to help up somebody's game. The first thing we can do is help provide information. There are a lot of people within our county that think that the little metal thing they get from the vet is their license. It's not. It's a rabies tag. The vets don't necessarily make that clear. In our county, in our state, not having your dog licensed is a misdemeanor. It's not a civil infraction. So when I ticket somebody for not having a license, not only are they getting a $500 fine, but they're getting a misdemeanor on their record. So does it make sense to, with an otherwise caring, monitoring person who is taking care of their animal, to immediately cite when they think this whole time that their dog has been licensed? They don't know the law. So explaining to them, okay, this is what needs to happen. I'm giving you 2 weeks, or recently we moved to 30 days because vets are so backed up, to get your dog vaccinated and come in here and get that license and get on board. What that does is it helps build a better relationship with your community. It helps people feel like, you know, you kind of thrown them a bone for a minute there, so they get they can get back on track and do what they thought they were already doing and being a responsible owner. And it gives them information that they end up taking back to their friends and family because they found out something they didn't know, and you didn't make them feel like they should be shamed or embarrassed about it. And they, rather than going to their people and saying cuss word, animal control, they're saying, hey, did you know that Dr. Saunders, gives these tags, but they're not licensed. So it helps sort of spread the good word out there. The next thing that's really important is providing resources. How many folks here work with an organization or know to be able to refer an organization that has a pet food pantry? Okay, how many people have some sort of fence repair kit that you take with you? Okay. Trixie was a dog who we frequent flyer. The minute she came in, the director of your county animal control should not know your dog and know your address and know what you look like and know half of your driver's license number by heart. So in our conversations, talking with Trixie's owner, their backyard wasn't a good place to have, one of those turned down tie-outs. What was really happening is the kids were letting, it was summertime, the kids were letting the dog out the front door, out the screen door a lot. And they forget to make sure it's shut all the way behind them. And a lot of this was happening while Dad, who worked the night shift, was napping, but the kids were still outside playing with the neighbors. So the next time I saw that Trixie had come in after hours, I swung by the hardware store, picked up the $3 hook and eyelash, and gave it to him, and said, hey, adult level, let's stop this from happening. We didn't see Trixie for another 5 months. She still figured out how to get out. But sometimes it's that simple fix that can help an overworked person who's working 2 or 3 jobs, trying to take care of everything they can, and things are falling through the cracks. It was an easy fix for us, and it helped keep a dog in the home, and that loved her. But of course there comes a time where you've exhausted all efforts, or where you've given somebody, hey, you have 72 hours to get this dog to a vet, and they don't do it, or they don't follow back up with you, and then it's truly time for that enforcement level. Not because they were sassy to you, not because they were a jerk, because some people really do have a really hard time the minute they see a badge, the minute they see a rescue person who like, what are you doing on my porch asking if I have a dog? Not everybody is open to learning different ways to take care of pets, and the way I always try to think of it is someone knocked on my door and said, hey, your geraniums need to be watered. What are you doing? You're weird. And so, it helps me to sort of think about that when I go onto someone else's property and say, hey, you should do this more. And making sure that if they are standoffish or rude or have a problem with me about that I always have to take what their day looks like into account before I whip out that citation. When it comes to punitive measures, we talked a little bit about different degrees of citations and things. One of the biggest pitfalls of our punitive measures has been in the past, okay, your dog's not licensed, I'm impounding it. Your dog's not licensed, there's a huge fee for it to go home. Your dog was stray or your cat was loose or your donkeys ran away. And so we're gonna load them up and make it really difficult for you to keep your pet. One, that overloads our sheltering system. But the other thing is what happens is you end up penalizing people who are already this close to the poverty level or working paycheck to paycheck. And ultimately, when you take that money out of that home, maybe they can't pay it, so now they've got a bench warrant. Then they get pulled over for speeding or having a blinker out. Now they're hanging out in jail while they get processed. So we've deprived that person of their income, we've taken them out of earning their dollars, and it could just be a huge effect to do something that also creates a disposable pet mentality, which is, you did something wrong, I'm taking your pet, and then what are they gonna do 6 months later? Get a new one. Yeah, they're gonna buy that pit bull puppy down the street for $200, right? They want a pet. So it can be part of our role to help with making our communities, balancing that legal obligation with the ethical situation as considerations of what we're working with. We just recently had a situation that blew up all over social media because someone posted a picture of someone's dog who was really thin, and some of those pictures were from this afternoon. But when one of my animal control officers went out there and took a look at the dog, she was like, those pictures can't be from recently. She doesn't look like this at all. But people were pretty upset on social media. Where we just talked to the people, they already had a vet appointment, they already knew that she'd been losing weight, and she actually had been having profuse diarrhea and vomiting because people kept putting food into her yard. So they were giving her, they were sneaking hamburgers, they were putting Alpo, like bad quality, gross, underneath the fence. So we talked a little bit more about, hey, go outside with your dog at night, right? We don't want people to be feeding her gross stuff. And the situation's getting a little hot on social media. So for her own safety, let's get her to the vet and see what's going on. It is hard sometimes, especially after a 12-hour shift or a 20-hour day, to dig deep and find that empathy, especially when you've had a whole bunch of jerks all day long, and people have blown up the phone and cussing at you. I always think back to when, a whole other lifetime ago, I was an English teacher, and I would read my 9th grade students' papers, and I would put them in piles of A, B, C, D. You didn't do it. And I would read them and put them in the piles, and I would read them and put them in the piles. And then I would go through each of the piles, because there was something I noticed within my first month of teaching, which is if you read a B paper right after you read a D paper, it's a D paper, right? Because of what you're comparing it to. So then comparing all the B's, you're like, oh, this, okay. This goes this way, this goes a little bit up, all of those. And so it's hard sometimes after having a lot of D paper experiences to look at every call, every new house, every new person who comes in the door of your shelter or calls you rescue as a new person. It's so incredibly easy to just be like, people suck. I hate this. Why am I in this profession? I just want to go home and take a look back. So you heard, for those of you in 2 sessions ago in this room, you heard a little bit of this slide, which is animal welfare really does have also a harshness to people issue. People are the same people, human beings, are who adopt our animals, who goes home with our friends. And so when we say, I hate people but love animals, we're dividing ourselves from our community and placing ourselves outside the network of, like, I'm a people, and there's different ways that we can work together. So there's a difference between sympathy and empathy when we're talking about balancing this compassion versus spirit of the law and letter of the law. Sympathy can get you sometimes, especially with folks who know how to manipulate, where you feel bad for them. And so just as a lot of D paper experiences and having to reset your brain with every interaction, you also have to think about a little bit of professional distance with each person that you're interacting with, to be able to say, I understand this is hard and this is frustrating. Where are your roadblocks? Well, I don't know, my uncle always told me that if a dog has the red range, you put motor oil on it. Anybody hear that one? Yeah. Super popular down south. And it's like, okay, so you thought you were doing what's right based on everything your uncle always told you. Let's go get you some Dawn dish soap to cut the grease. And then, do you have a vet? And getting them in touch with a vet. Getting them in touch with a rescue that might be able to help, or an outreach group that might be able to help. Because really what we're talking about is like 3 months, like a couple Bravectos, right? We know how to fix it. But they are using what goes on in their community. When you go into a home and every kid is wearing their winter coat because there's no heat, are you kind of surprised that the dog doesn't have straw in their doghouse? So where's that barrier happening? And looking at it and saying, okay, I understand this is hard, and it's hard to learn a new thing. But we're gonna work on learning a new thing together, and I'm gonna help you keep it between the rails. Sometimes it takes a little bit to switch between a very top-down approach of lots of barriers, 9-page adoption applications, vet checks and personal references. We ticket for everything. We ticket, we have, mentally we have quotas, or someone talks about the budget and how we have to generate a certain amount of revenue. If your metrics for success are how many tickets were written or how many dogs were brought in, there's currently an animal control in my state that up until recently, it was a competition of who could bring in the most dogs. It doesn't help, right? So sometimes we need to stop and we need to reset and recalibrate with some empathy training. And sometimes that can mean things like conflict resolution, what we used to call verbal judo, that ability to help people decompress and de-escalate and be able to get them to actually say what's really going on instead of going to their traditional way of managing their anger. One of the reasons it's so important to talk about empathy and being able to interact with every new family, every new person that has an animal that comes into our world as part of that human-animal intersection is ensuring that we're building trust. We're promoting compliance through that cooperation, and then we don't have repeat problems with that family. Talking about our professionalism, working with effectiveness, finding different methods that assess our effectiveness. It's really easy to go to basic data, and instead of thinking about what's best for our community. For folks who have had really rough times with law enforcement, child protective services, adult protective services, you knocking on their door, showing up, can sometimes instigate stress response and trauma. And so by building some empathy, working with people to work around some of the issues, we can also help repair some of that, as well as ensuring animal welfare. Quick skipping a couple of these slides, they will all be available. So basically what we're doing is we're balancing enforcement with education and collaborating with our community, learning more of what is the conventional wisdom in the community and where to start. Where is everybody as a learner about animal health and safety? Also understanding where the resources are in your jurisdiction, in your community. Detroit, for example, 30% of the folks there do not have reliable transportation. And the average veterinarian is over 7 miles away, most of them averaging about 11 to 13 miles away. So if you don't have reliable transportation and you live in a veterinary services desert, we need to sort of think outside the box on how to collaborate with our communities to bring those resources into the communities and the areas that need it most. And that means always including the families and people. So part of transparency and not going empty-handed is offering things like shelter tours, collaborations, interacting with different organizations with health and human services, working with different rescues, with different shelters, and trying to find different types of resources that already exist in the community. One of the things we have is an eviction toolkit. We get a lot of people calling about owner surrenders and getting evicted, and the first thing I say is, what does your eviction notice look like? It's from my landlord. Does it have a judge's signature on it? No. They hand it to me, and it's something printed on Microsoft Word. And so we're able to, with our eviction toolkit, we have a legal service that it services the surrounding 3 counties that has a hotline for fair housing. So we're able to put them in contact with an attorney to make sure that they're not being improperly evicted from their location. We also have a list of all of our pet-friendly apartment complexes. So I have a couple case studies here. The gentleman who lived in this house, his name is Peter, and he had lived in this house where he was born in 1930. This is in Detroit. This photo was taken when we first pulled up at the house, and these 2 puppies were there. Infested with fleas. At that point in my career, I don't think I'd ever seen that many fleas, to the point that we gave 3 flea baths in my front yard in a kiddie pool. These little guys were way too young and too anemic to stay there. And we were able to get them veterinary help, but we didn't just take those animals and leave. We ended up going back multiple times, and what we found out was that Peter's home was pretty much everybody in the neighborhood's home. People coming in there out there all the time. It was actually a home with a roof. We had folks that would be hanging out on the street corner, find a stray dog, and they're like, well, I'm bringing it to Skeeter. He knows what to do with it. And so by connecting him with us, non-judgmentally, we were able to help so many animals in that community either figure out where they actually belonged, what yard they got out of, instead of staying at this house, or get those animals into rescue without someone who wasn't able to care for himself, much less care for other animals. You're also able to put him in touch with some faith-based local organizations that have a human food pantry, and explain to them that, like, hey, he's like this community resource for everybody who is unhoused in this whole area. And so they didn't just send him with 1 box like they normally would of non-perishable food. They would send him with 3 because he was really feeding a huge portion of the neighborhood.
We've got just a couple minutes.
Sure.
Okay.
Last couple slides. So, you can tell by my happy face, this was a while ago. So we had helped reunite these folks with their lost dog. And about 6 months later, got a call, I guess about 9 months later, got a call. It was Easter, and somebody's intoxicated uncle decided that this was a perfect gift for their children. And they said, I don't know anything about chickens. I'm going to call that dog lady. And so that's me taking two illegally dyed chickens to a farm where they lived out their days as happy little friends. One was actually, the blue one was actually a boy. So we were able to network those guys out there. But because we had a positive relationship in returning a stray dog, those little friends, we were considered, a resource for these folks to call back. Veterinary services obviously can be really challenging to help folks with that, and we've talked with a couple presenters about intervention, owner retention, knowing where those resources are, and really just looking at the high tide raises all ships, right? When we bring everybody's level up, that's where we really win the battle. One thing I want to touch on real quick is hoarding, or otherwise collecting. Hoarding is technically a psychological diagnosis. So one of the things that we've been doing recently where I currently would be sitting on about 4 cat collecting situations. What we have done, because those are overwhelmed caregivers and they are not exploitation hoarders, where they're trying to make money off of the sad stories of these animals, or just folks who things got out of control, is working with them to focus on the females first, taking 2 or 3 every couple days or once a week out of there when we do our spay and neuter, getting the kittens, the females first, then working with the males. And we've been able to work with 3 or 4 families that really what they needed was help. They didn't want these animals to begin with. So are there ways that we can help people that are otherwise, we would, at first look, it looks like cruelty, neglect. But when you talk to the person, they've been asking for help for a long time. They just didn't know where to ask help from. And they were too afraid to call animal control. So remember, while following the letter of law is very important, understanding the spirit behind it helps us make ethical and thoughtful choices in the work that we do. All right, I think we are at the end. Talked a little long, so thank you very much for your time.